Good evening, everyone. It's so nice to see you all. Tonight, I feel thankful for the ashe, the intelligence, and the generosity in this room. I'm grateful for you, Claudia Rankine, and your willingness to be present with both the present and the past, and use your gift to elevate the conversations of everyday people, working class people, of academics, artists, believers and non-believers. Your commitment to story is changing how stories are written. I can remember being in an airport and seeing the epic David Hammond's work in The Hood on the front cover of your book, and seeing the word citizen beneath, and not knowing if the book was a reflection on conceptual art practices, politics, or more especially Black politics, or a reader that would try to tackle the matter of American culture in the height of the complexities of racial and spatialized conflict, which at the time was proving to be somewhat volatile. I would come to understand that you have invested in it all, but not from the perspective of a viewer on the margins, but rather as a friend and scribe situated in the heat of things, interpreter and astute medium, present even when no one sees you. Your plays, essays, poems, and artistic selections channel social conditions and offer feedback loops and mirrors and amplifiers. Claudia Rankine is an esteemed poet, essayist, and playwright, and is the author of Just Us, An American Conversation, Citizen, An American Lyric, and other amazing works, including Don't Let Me Be Lonely, An American Lyric. She is the former chancellor of the Academy of American Poets, the winner of the 2014 Jackson Poetry Prize, and a contributing editor of Poets and Writers. She received a MacArthur Fellowship in 2016. And Claudia is currently a professor of creative writing at NYU. Rankine has co-edited American Women Poets in the 21st Century, Where Lyrics Meets Language, 2002, American Poets in the 21st Century, The New Poetics and the Racial Imaginary, Writers on Race in the Life of the Mind. Her poems have been included in the anthologies Great American Prose Poems, From Poe to Present, Best American Poetry, and The Garden Thrives, 20th Century African American Poetry. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Claudia Rankine.
Hello, 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 hello. I'm so honored to be here. You guys have a reputation of being very intellectual. I want to say that I miss Lauren Ballant so much. She was such a friend of the mind. And when I said yes to this, it was in part to be where she was, even as I knew it was possible she would not be here. So I send out the love to her, wherever she is. But, you know, one moves this way and then you get recentered with another. And so, Tiaska, it's been such an honor to meet you today. You've been in my life, all my thinking life. So it continues my affection for this place. I am going to, I heard that you couldn't hear me last week. That was a tragedy. And because of that, I'm going to start a little bit backwards and come forward with Jennifer's work. In the last months, I have spent much of my time thinking about the concept of meanwhile in relationship to theorist Homi Bhabha's statement that the risk to life is a risk to living. The untimely deaths of African Americans at the hands of police, the risk to life, or due to systemic racism, creates continuous stress on our Black American population, and those stresses contribute to what Bhabha names the risk to living. This risk to living is most aptly thought of in terms of the injustices that complicate without stopping a life. These risks exist both structurally and interpersonally in order to keep Blacks precarious, unprepared, and vulnerable. They account for why, as a group, we suffer most tragically from comorbidities. It also accounts for the high infant mortality rates for Black children, or unborn children who then die. This fact of comorbidities has been used by whites as a defense in murder cases where they argue that the treatment of Blacks only resulted in Black death, or in Bhabha's terminology, the risk to life, because Blacks are always already dead, even if you are considering these deaths as an acceptable loss. One example of this would be Eric Nelson's defense of Derek Chauvin. You remember this? In his defense, he said, and I quote, "You will see that 3 Minneapolis police officers could not overcome the strength of Mr. Floyd. Mr. Floyd died of a cardiac arrhythmia that occurred as a result of hypertension, his coronary disease, ingestion of methamphetamines and fentanyl, and the adrenaline flowing through his body, all of which acted to further compromise an already compromised heart." The language of Nelson works at cross purposes. Mr. Floyd is both very strong and simultaneously compromised. The default argument of white fear needs to be supported, even when it flies in the face of the already dead defense. That little slip he makes when he says that adrenaline is growing, flowing, is one of my favorite stutters of late. Though recently we have had a few high-profile cases of police who were incarcerated for unjustifiably killing Black Americans, white culture more generally both accepts and drives Black death. A number of recent social science articles has stated that white Americans' resistance to vaccinations and masking was driven by the early data reporting that Black Americans were succumbing to the virus at a greater rate than whites. One of these articles, entitled "Highlighting COVID-19 Racial Disparities Can Reduce Support for Safety Precautions Among White U.S. Residents" by Allison Skinner et al., said, "Reading about the persistent inequalities that produce COVID-19 racial disparities reduced fear of COVID-19, reduced empathy for those vulnerable to COVID-19, and reduced support for safety precautions. These findings suggest that publicizing racial health disparities has the potential to create a vicious cycle wherein raising awareness reduces support for the very policies that could protect public health and reduce disparities." In other words, certain whites would risk themselves and their families to kill African Americans by any means possible. I mean, that is really stunning to me. This brings to mind a line from a John Ashbery poem entitled, "They Dream Only of America." There is nothing to do for our liberation except wait in the horror of it. Horror adjacency. That, friends, is the risk to living. This returns me to the concept of meanwhile. That was just background. Like what's out there, which I have defined previously as a path through the onslaught that is the unbroken onslaught, that nonetheless insists on life within the risk to living. In the meanwhile, one is always both conscious and unconscious of the risk to life. Meanwhile is concurrent experience inside the everyday. It's caught by the vernacular and the unspeakable at the same time. This means that by definition, the meanwhile is porous, and its dialogue of adjacency, a phrase I borrow from Tina Kemp's The Black Gaze, allows the outside to come in. Meanwhile, absorbs the spectacle into the vernacular of the quotidian. I outlined this a lot in last week's talk on the painter Jennifer Packer's work, and that's what you're seeing on screen. Oh, I have to put it there. You won't see it if I don't put it there. There it is. And I made the claim that artists more than ever have taken on an ethics of care within their practice of meanwhile by inhabiting the meanwhile. So that the very act of going into the home and portraying the body in repose is a way of presenting a caring practice to the culture at large. My question for myself last week was, as a maker, how can contemporary artistic work carry, reveal, and compassionately accommodate the porousness, the absorption, without replicating the violence, while keeping the violence and absorption locatable? Those of you who are familiar with my work will know that part of my practice has been to document what is happening. Partly because I think it is important to show the ordinary violence that happens. And I didn't like the idea of getting into conversations where people were like, that didn't really happen, it didn't happen like that, they didn't say that, you're misinterpreting. So I thought I would just show it. And I was here many years ago giving a talk at the Art Institute, and the students said, we don't want to see it. We don't want to see the violence. We don't want it replicated. We don't want it. And that was a good moment for me because it made me think, how can I satisfy my desire to underline a thing and not replicate the thing? And so that becomes the question. How can the work create an environment that allows the viewer to feel into and beyond the limits of devastation, And finally, the question I wish to move forward with is, can Meanwhile be a conceptual space in which to work out the management of Meanwhile? Jennifer Packer's work offered us an undefined environment of repose that situated grief into the vernacular of everyday corporeal collapse. She blended the body in loose portraiture with its surrounding environment within a virtual single color wash. I mean, obviously they're pinks and blues, but it is sort of a wash of yellow. This contributed to a mode of feeling that left the specificity of a readable narrative behind. The invitation was to feel. So you don't walk away from this thinking, oh, I wonder what year that was. I wonder what that bird is doing. It becomes an invitation into the environment itself. My commitment last week mostly concerned Blessed Are Those Who Mourn, Brianna, Brianna. That's the title of this piece. I guess I should go that way. This mesh of the real and the surreal speaks to the times that bridge the days, the taking in of all the deaths, and the metabolizing of the risk to life, even as one remains alive and within the risk to living. The time that activates compassion and care as means of metabolizing a reality that pours in and causes one to feel, even when they feel like they are drowning. This is the 2019 A Lesson in Dying, which replicates a similar wash, different color. Again, you're not going to go in there and try and figure out what the narrative is. You're going to take the environment. This is Grace's 2017, and the last one, 2018, The Body Has Memory. That's the face. So even when it has a portrait, you can see that the face is not for you. There is no direct one-to-one identification because that is not the point. Today, I would like to look at the work at the phenomenal painter, sculptor, installation artist, filmmaker, writer, and friend, Titus Kaphar. Born in Kalamazoo, Michigan in 1976, he now lives and works in New Haven, Connecticut. He is a recipient of too many prizes and awards to list them all, but they include a 2018 MacArthur Fellowship, a 2018 Art for Justice Grant, a 2016 Robert Rauschenberg Artist as Activist Grant. He has given hugely instructive TED Talks. Has everyone seen his TED Talks? No? Those of you who haven't, I was very tempted to play them for you because, especially the first one on where he whitewashes the image, I suggest you take the time that it takes to watch it. He has also, like the equally phenomenal Theaster Gates, literalized his commitment to social engagement in his local community and more nationally with our community of artists by establishing Next Haven, an arts incubator and residency program in a 40,000 square feet facility in the Dixwell neighborhood of New Haven. If you haven't been to New Haven, I think it's synonymous with the South Side of Chicago. It houses a gallery, a theater, artists and curatorial studios, apprentice programs, and live workspaces for rent. If you're looking for something to support that has already changed the future, I humbly suggest Next Haven. As you can hear, Titus is my neighbor. I lived in New Haven, he lived in New Haven, so I've had the honor of becoming friends with him. But he really is a force, so that you never really are adjacent. It's bigger than, he is bigger than anything I know. So I bow down to him as someone who has created an intervention into American culture through Next Haven and through my viewing of his work and practice. He has shifted how it is I see, enter, and inhabit our history. He has extended the historical document to expose that which has been erased or refrained towards a selected white supremacist narrative with collaboration and collusion of contemporary white historians, sociologists, lawyers, and political scientists. And I'm going to show you a Fox News interview with Tucker Carlson, and I had a lot of thought about doing it because, Tucker Carlson, we know, is performing what he performs. But I'm going to show it to you because he's talking to a Penn law professor, Amy Wax, and she's the one I'm interested in. And I don't know what goes down here at the University of Chicago, but academic institutions like this one have been responsible in maintaining the agenda of white supremacist thinking across the disciplines. If it wasn't coming out of the institutions, it wouldn't be shaping the culture. And we, as academics, sit in rooms and let it happen.
How is that different from vandalism? It just seems like people coming in and wrecking everything that was valuable in an institution that they never built themselves.
It's very reckless and destructive. It's very vindictive. It's very angry.
Yeah. Where does that anger come from, do you think?
I think there is just a tremendous amount of resentment and shame of non-Western peoples against Western peoples for Western peoples' outsized achievements and contributions. I mean, it's really unbearable. I was actually, leaving aside American blacks, who I think do feel that resentment and shame and envy. I mean, it's this unholy brew of sentiments. I was talking to Glenn Lowry about this bizarre fact that Asian and South Asian, Indian doctors at Penn Med, which I know people there and I know what's going on there, that they're on the ramparts for the anti-racism initiative for Dump on America. America's an evil racist place. These are immigrants.
The number one highest income group in America is
hate America.
Right.
A goodly number of them,
but
not
you're
all.
from a group, I mean, first of all, I hate even thinking in terms of groups anyway, because what matters is the individual, obviously. But as long as we are, if you're a member of the highest income, highest achievement group in America, and you're looking down another group, native-born whites, for example, and saying you're the problem. Like, how does that work exactly?
Well, that is, to me, utterly bizarre and fascinating. And
why does anybody put up with that?
Right. I'm not saying all Indian immigrants are this way. I'm just saying you look at the roster of, who's leading the programs, the endless number of programs where they talk about diversity and racism and all the racism that people have to encounter in medicine and how racist medicine is and all this. And you see these brown faces or you see these Asian faces and you think, literally you think, so you're coming from your country, which you're implying is equal or better than our country.
Literally.
Okay, that's enough. But we could call it comic relief, or we could call it what it is. Penn law professor, holding a chair at Penn State, at Penn. And her colleague is, well, before I get to that, I wanted to say, I wonder if institutions of slavery, the genocide of Native populations, and mass incarceration are the outsized achievements and contributions. And I don't say it as a joke. I really wonder if that's the outside contributions. If she were to push, if that's where she would go. But my favorite thing was the unholy brew of sentiments of resentment and shame that I'm carrying with me. Penn is also the home of the political scientist John DeLulio, who coined the term superpredator. We know it as something that Hillary Clinton used, but he coined it in 1995 and argued into existence this racist trope. Also a professor there. So what whiteness continues to insist on is the supremacy of whiteness right now. I'm sure it happens here as well. So Kaphar, and I bring this up only to say that what Titus's work is actually in conversation with these narratives that are out there. Kaphar has stated that he is committed to, and this is a quote, revealing something of what has been lost in order to investigate the power of a rewritten history, close quote. The something lost has often been the people who, even when depicted, remain invisible. Here are some of the earlier works that I call these works an intervention into the historical narratives we have been fed since childhood. So George Washington on his horse. This one is called In Shadows of Liberty, 2016. Washington seems in battle or posed as if to enter battle. He is partially covered by yellow strips. You can imagine a ledger, a slave ledger with the names of the slaves. And each of these have been nailed in the face of Washington. The shredded strips are nailed into his face, covering his mouth, as if to suggest he should be saying their names. Titus has said that the nails are a Central African tradition. You put nails on a powerful figure, mythical figure, to bring hope. You nail in your wish a kind of hope to life. And that's what led him to nail in the names. So that would have been every slave that Washington owned. And if you might remember that he freed his slaves when he died, or he said that Martha could free them when she died, but she, of course, didn't do that, so whatever. Gestures. In the myth of benevolence, another founding father is depicted. The traditional portrait is peeled back to expose the enslaved Sally Hemings. So again, Titus has put Jefferson and then peeled back his portrait. It's not literally peeled back, but painted in. And Hemings comes forward. Titus has movingly stated that if we don't amend history by making new images and new representations, we are always going to be excluding ourselves. We will join in the exclusion. This one is called Space to Forget, and it's this series that I'm interested in. Because this will cause Titus to shift his own orientation a little bit. So it's been interesting to watch. I've had the privilege of being able to go to his studio and hang out while he's working, and to see him grapple with the representation and to move away from the historical into the vernacular of the ordinary has been interesting. In Space to Forget, we profoundly feel Titus' intention of amending history by shifting the gaze onto the domestic worker. The painting was inspired by a photograph he came across while looking for representations of Black people. He said, "I saw this photograph and it really disturbed me. That beyond the fact that this white child was on the back of a Black woman, there was no context for the photo." For example, and I think by context he means, for example, you have no idea why they're taking the photograph. I mean, there was an actual photograph before the painting where there was a white child sitting on what one assumes to be a domestic's back as she brushes the floor. Who took the photo? The man of the house? The lady of the house? Why? Is it just to see the child? Or was the combination of interests? You have no idea. Consequently, all that could be seen was a Black woman as another seating possibility for a white child in a parlor furnished with sofa and chair where the adults just finished their scotch or bourbon or whatever. If you can see on the table, there's a bottle of liquor, 2 glasses, and then you have 3, if you count the woman, you have 3 possibilities of areas to sit. And before you think, lighten up, the kid's just playing. Consider, why is the woman dressed to leave? I mean, this is my projection on this. I don't know if she's dressed to leave, but she looks dressed, and still on her knees cleaning up. The violence evident in the woman's positioning with cleaning brush in hand, begins the act of erasure that disallows the painting of both her arms. So you see the one arm, you can see the bracelet on the arm, you see the earrings, but in this, he doesn't paint in the second arm. So her position begins the act of erasure, her positioning. Her grayish hair ages her. You can see, do you see how her hair is a little grayish? Placing her in that position for a lifetime. Even as her gold bracelet and earrings give her a life beyond the moment. But for the painting, the now of the moment is all there is. The removal of the child here becomes a moment of meeting the violence of erasure with the painter's own act, Titus's own act of refusal. So you take the child out, you're not going to look at the child, you're going to look at her. In 2019, he paints this. It's called Not My Burden, which plays with the Rudyard Kipling's phrase, the white man's burden, in their management of the injustices they have caused in non-white countries, in their enterprise of empire building. Titus portrays what appears to be two childcare workers in presumably the home of a white person in this narrative rebuilding enterprise. He has, in interviews, called the two women sisters. There is a portrait in the right-hand corner of a white family's ancestral relatives dressed in such a way that places them in colonial times, with a black woman positioned in the rear of the painting. She, historically, would have been enslaved. If the painting on the wall of the painting represents the past, the present-day portrayal places the black woman in a crucial and intimate role of the primary caretaker of the infant charges. By literally cutting into the canvas, Kaphar switches the focal point from the white children who blend into the background of to the faces of the women. He does this presumably in order to reframe the hierarchical structure of who demands our attention in the act of seeing. Since initially presenting this painting, Titus has asked an even more interesting question of not my burden. What bias prevented, this is him, and I quote, "What bias prevented me, as the painter, from seeing these women as mothers?" Close quote. I take this question to mean, could he have repositioned these women as the focal point of the painting without the assumption that our gaze is determined by the values of whiteness? Is there a way for the artist to present the risks to living without the subjugation of the black figure? Not my burden occasions a shift in Titus's own seeing. He answers this question in part with a series of paintings entitled From a Tropical Space. These paintings present a supersaturated, surrealist world And though the children are still represented by white cutout forms from the canvas, there is no confusion regarding the Black women's relationship to the missing children. They are mothers who are, in one form or another, processing the loss or potential loss of their children. It is here Homi Bhabha's "The Risk to Life is a Risk to Living" presents itself in the world of the painting. The environment appears radioactive, and the toxicity feels as saturated as the colors themselves. The precarity and unpreparedness of the mothers becomes its own character. The disappeared children, though present to their mother's arms, or to their mother's memories, appear to be subject to an unnamed trauma. The mothers themselves exhibit missing body parts. This is not the blend of Packer's paintings, but a more violent sense of amputation that is also tied to the environment, the outside world. And if you think about the situation in Flint, Michigan, for example, or Katrina, or so many other examples we have at the ready, the mothers are both, in the meanwhile, living, sending the kids off to school, and also worried they've been poisoned, also worried that they'll be killed. You know, in this one, the bus is there, but where are they going? Where is there to go? Titus describes the time of these paintings in this way. In this world, time is all now. The past is now. The present is now. It's all now. It's not a horizontal stacking of time. It's a vertical stacking of time, a culmination of all the anxiety and all of the fear into this instant, to which he adds, I am beginning to wonder if the color in these paintings has more to do with the emotional landscape than a geographic one. The outside world is ominous. Then he states definitively, the series is about Black mothers. And he says that, he says, as if we would think something else. He says the series is about Black mothers. And I think it's important because it's to him that he has, it is no longer Titus repositioning and feeling compelled to re-narratorize what is being narrated. It's him beginning to understand that Black people, Black women, Black children are negotiating the meanwhile, and that whiteness is there no matter what. You don't have to bring in the white child to understand what that Black mother is negotiating. As if that was ever in doubt, the series is about Black women. But he has actively wrenched the Black woman out of her historical positioning of enslaved person, and thereby, in his mind, as much as in these paintings. And that's huge. That the meanwhile positions seeing from within your own body. That you're not looking around the room to see what white people are looking at or thinking, or that you know what you know. And you are doing what you need to do to protect your families. He has actively wrenched the Black woman out of her historical positioning of enslaved person in his mind, as much as in these paintings. This does not make her any more prepared for the meanwhile, but it does allow her to be seen. Homi Bhabha says, we are always going to be unprepared, because to be prepared would be to be prepared for the insanity. And as Tina Kempt has argued in listening to images, to be seen is to be given expressiveness, mobility, and resistance. These are the elements that allow for a future. I'm just going to run through a couple of these and then we'll move to the Q&A. This one I find interesting because of that surgical glove. This is called Twins. The other one was called Analogous Colors. This one is called Intravenous. And you see the stand behind her. Expecting, from a Tropical Place, 2019. And all of them have that sort of white glow. Have you noticed that on their face? In terms of radioactiveness that they're being exposed to, which is itself whiteness. Should I tell you a funny story? I know I'm always such a Debbie Downer, but I was at the doctor the other day, and you know, they come in, they poke you, and then they say, get dressed. And they go back to their office. And then you're supposed to go to the office. So I got to the office, but he was talking to another doctor. So I was standing outside, and they were arguing about whether or not they should give the iodine pills to people who were requesting them, because the Russians are coming. But in these paintings, the Russians are here, except they're not Russians. The aftermath, this one is called, I think, live in the world of Katrina, Flint, Michigan, the devastation literally having devastated the outside world. Beneath an unforgiving sun. And then these two at the end are interesting because I've heard Titus talk about them as a kind of antidote to the loss and devastation, that this character, this woman who's braiding the hair, becomes a kind of savior character. And you'll see it here. That where are the children? Here they are. They have been collected by the future. Thank you very much. So I think we are going to have a Q&A.
If you would please join me in thanking Claudia again. Good. Thank you so much for this, Sister Claudia, I want to say. We're going to take some questions both here in the audience and then some online. Why don't we start here, and I'll join you. That was great.
Thank you.
I'm a
I
little
love
uptight tonight, but I'm trying to warm up. This is my first time in this room, but
It's
that was
beautiful.
hot.
It's a beautiful room.
Yeah, it's so nice to have these two painters in dialogue. Jennifer Packer and Titus. They're both dear to me, and it's just so good to hear you unpack their practices. Do we have a question here in the audience? Yes? Oh.
So we know that Tucker Carlson is racist. However, recently we found out he is not only racist, it's much worse. He supports Russia murdering Ukraine, which is not a racist problem. They're the same race. Therefore, we should say that he is kind of sadist who support killing of big group, any small group, independently of race. In this case, this his racism is only part of his personality, and maybe not major part, because in big scale how Russians kill Ukrainians, he supports this. And it's not a racial thing at all. What will be your comment on this?
You're talking about Trump?
No, but Tucker Carlson.
Carlson. Carlson is performing. And he is performing for Trump's base. And it is, I think it's worse than you say. I think he's racist, I think he's sexist, I think he's all the things he presents, but I also think he's nothing. If tomorrow someone told him his ratings would be better if he said McDonald's should be the new country, he would do it. So I'm not interested in Tucker Carlson at all. I was interested in the professor who joined him.
Anything, which is not racist thing at all. There is nothing, they're the same race, they both white. Ukrainians and they who try to fight Russians, but he chose Russians.
No, I understand. I
Why
understand.
is this? So what it has to do with his racism? He supports every killing that's possible, independently of race.
Because Trump supports Putin, and he supports Trump, and so you support what Trump's base wishes to have, which includes racism.
Thank you so much. I feel that I feel a huge amount of gratitude to you for introducing me to two amazing artists. I wanted to ask about visibility, particularly with regard to the cutouts of the children. I could not tell in the projected images whether they're actually cutouts or whether they're paintings of cutouts, and therefore, are the shadows that are in the photographs painted shadows, or are they the actual shadows on what is always behind the paintings, a white wall? So that's just a question of information, but I think the fact that I can't tell is interesting because there's a very interesting interplay between what you think is visible when I was feeling that when I was looking at the painting, and I kept going between thinking that the invisible children who weren't there were more visible than these extraordinarily detailed black faces that, as I was watching the whiteness on the whitewashing of the bright light on the white faces, and so they became more visible. But there was a kind of interplay between visibility and invisibility, the whiteness on the faces, the blackness of the shadows on the white wall. And I was just wondering if you would comment on where, you know, you feel this interplay is going. Is that part of this going back and forth that one does in what you're calling the meanwhile?
Well, I think any erasure is going to grab our attention. We're always going to sort of want to enter it to see if there's something to be found in it. I think Titus is really interested in what happens when the Black woman is then competing with that erasure, since she is normally the place of erasure. You know, Black women, myself, usually hold that invisibility no matter what. So what happens when you create a space of, because the question would be, why not draw then in the Black children? If you want to look at their precarity relative to their mothers. And I think he intentionally doesn't to create that very thing. But yes, there's an actual space there.
You have two up top.
Thanks so much for joining us, Claudia. I had a question just about this category of like the meanwhile, and how you're kind of, how we could kind of think about it in relation to some of the other ways of naming or framing collective ways of inhabiting time that have emanated from a lot of recent slavery study scholarships. I'm thinking of the afterlives of slavery, the unfinished business of freedom, being in the wake, and how you think visuality, but especially painting, is kind of like engaging with like these notions of temporality. Because what's interesting about painting to me is that, right, there's, in many ways, it's kind of like a snapshot. There's a way that, on the one hand, there's almost kind of like frozen time in the ways that painting is like not moving. But there's also like this idea of a ambiguous sense of like location within time. So just wondering about how you'd situate this category of the meanwhile within those framings.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the idea of meanwhile is to enter into the vernacular of the everyday and to stack time so that the risk to life, the George Floyd's killing, is simultaneous, concurrent with my teaching my class, for example, or somebody struggling with COVID. You know, it's all, and Amy Cooper doing what she's doing in Central Park. You know, it's all sort of stacked into one moment. And so when we have somebody like Christina Sharp talking about the wake, that I think is all of the force of the past coming in to inform the now, the present, the moment. But the meanwhile has, for me, the activity of living in it. That's a difference for me. That it's not just about the mourning, the afterlife of slavery in the sense that it has a psychic impact on now. It's about what does it mean that we still have kids to bring to daycare, and we still have a dinner to prepare, and we still are having sex, and we're still doing all the things that we do, knowing that at any moment the husband could be killed, the child could be killed. In fact, as they leave the door, out the door, you're putting one thing on the table and hoping they'll come back at the same time. you know, and I was just talking to Andrew Solomon recently, who was at my house, and we were talking about the rise of suicide among children during this time, and that's with African American children. It's really, it's too much for them to understand the precarity in which they're living. I mean, even some of this crazy shootings of these homeless people shooting in New York, that is also time. You know, we have thrown away people, and then we have spent a lot of time telling our children to be careful. And it's too much. It's the too muchness of it. You know, Lauren and I talked a lot about the management of the now. And the meanwhile has, you know, in my fantasy life, has that management sewn into it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much again for being here. Before you answered this, you kind of didn't answer it initially, but I wrote, like, what does it mean to be prepared for the meanwhile? That's not my question, because you sort of answered that by saying to be prepared is to be prepared for insanity. And in sort of the topic of insanity, there's an outpour of conservatism claiming a type of self-censorship, especially on college campuses, and especially even at UChicago with outlets like the Chicago Thinker that have vindictive slogans like outthinking the mob. What are your thoughts on this rhetoric generally, excuse me, and what is the implication of this avowed victim narrative, especially from the right?
Well, I think it's not only from the right. I think we get it most explicitly from the right, but I think we get it from liberal America too, in terms of not amplifying the right, for example, not putting certain things out there to inflame response. You know, the whole pushback on critical race theory, your question and that are sort of one question. You know, it's like, what is the pushback on educating the American public about the investments of American society? And a lot of time and work institutionally has gone into creating narratives that contribute to the benevolence of whiteness. So to expect that there wouldn't be a pushback by the very people who created those narratives is in some ways naive, I think, for the liberal whites. I mean, you know, a couple, it's not even before now even, you still can't even say white male privilege without people getting a little tense. Because as a culture, we have invested in the notion that white people are just people who have not been served by the decisions this country, the immigration laws, everything this country has, but the realty, the redlining, the everything. I mean, we have said it every which way until Sunday. And every day, people act like it's news.
Claudia, when you were when you were showing Titus's work, it made me think of this moment when I heard my colleague, Dr. Honey Crawford, who's here, the other night. She was talking about, it was a Portuguese word for those who had disappeared, the disappeared. And this idea, it was emerging from a film where the black male body in this case, at death, in a way, there's no way of accounting for the body. Like something happened, we don't know what happened. We don't know how he got shot or who shot him. When I look at these private eye investigations on Netflix, and there's like this deep and rigorous accounting for where were the people. That never happens on the west side of Chicago. There's nobody going like, with a pad saying, where were you on the night of the, so I haven't seen that. But this idea that there's something about Titus's paintings that's also offering this, it leaves you with the question. And at the same time that these violences might occur, Black life continues. Every once in a while, someone will ask me, what were you doing at the moment of 9/11, when the first tower went? And it's kind of like, meanwhile starts to mean like this kind of adjacent conflation. Like there was this mega thing happening in the world, and then my life was happening. I was cleaning up, watching TV. And there are these things, and it's like if one way of imagining, prenatal, suicide, young suicide, Black male teenage death, the lack of attention that we give mothers during prenatal care and natal care, these moments where our bodies are compromised because people just don't like us and just don't think we deserve that extra arresting moment that could resuscitate us, that we don't deserve the mouth to mouth because we don't know where these, and all the time cars keep driving by. And I wonder, at least meanwhile, this term, it is making me reconsider time. And I wanted to at least ask, and I see the young lady, if you could talk a little bit more about time in your poetry, in the ways in which the phenomenon of time shows up. I was listening to your reflections. There's a moment when it seemed Citizen could have been written 7 years ago, 10 years ago, 30 years ago, and that in a way, the unfortunate truth is that the story sounds. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about time.
Well, it's something, as some people know, I had cancer about 10 years ago, breast cancer. And one of the things having cancer does, or did for me, is suddenly it collapsed time. Every day could be your last day. Every time you go for a checkup, you think, this might be it. This might be the recurrence. This might be, and you sort of prepare yourself each time for that. And then you get a little bit more time. But it's always there. And in some ways, I feel like it has become a metaphor for what it is to live in the meanwhile, like the risk to life and the risk to living, being married at all times. One of the things I did was to make sure my daughter was taken care of, because I didn't want at any point, and every year she got older, I felt a little freer, like she could get on without me after this, and I think what happens with Black Americans, and this is why Black Americans and the word comorbidity live simultaneously, is that unless we process psychically the stresses that we are metabolizing all the time, we're going to get the suicides. We're going to get the high blood pressure. We're going to get all of the cancer. Yeah, I mean, not that we cause cancers, but our bodies are vulnerable. And so that's why I'm really interested in Jennifer Packer's work and your work and many artists who are working now, because there has been, Simone Lee, for example, there has been a shift that says, you know, forget about educating white people about anything. We have to look at ourselves. We have to be in the now of now. Because now is all we have. And we have to start taking care of ourselves, because the project of educating white people about the violence in this country has failed. We are en route to a fascist system. DeSantis has just declared that if Stacey Abrams takes Georgia, all hell is going to break loose. We could shake our heads, but I just hope she has good security.
Way back, and then gentlemen in front. Thank you.
The other thing is that white men are the people who kill themselves the most. So that's also interesting, because they're willing to vote into office people who will take everything from them, devastate their families in the name of whiteness.
I want to express our collective gratitude again by saying thank you for being here. And earlier you commented on the work of Jennifer Packer by saying that the purpose of the work was feeling rather than narrative and context, and I found that especially interesting. How do you reconcile the power of such a piece that evokes feeling and whose purpose is not narrative or context, and feeling being a very present-oriented thing, with careers and educations based on words, and a career such as yours based on words and narratives and history, which is something of the past? Can we write narratives whose purpose is feelings, and does the answer lie in the meanwhile?
That's a great question. You know, when I went to see Jennifer Packer's work the first time, I literally felt it. I didn't see it, I felt it. And so when I sat down to write the talk that you couldn't hear last week, I really was thinking, how did she do that? Because she's making choices all the time. And what are the choices are she making to make the painting a portal rather than a story? And I think the blurring of everything, so that you cannot have resolution, a refusal to give you an endpoint, is how she turns it back onto you. So then it lives in you and not on the canvas. And then you recognize what it is you have entered through the feeling you're having, rather than the story you're telling. You know how, like, white people have that tendency to say, we hired so-and-so, we haven't so we have solved diversity? that is approaching the long history of white supremacy as a thing that has a solution. And it's that kind of thing that her paintings refuse. There is no solution to this. There are no defined anything. And in his own way, I think Titus, in those empty spaces, does that too. You get lost in trying to find something you will never find.
You know, this makes me think, such a beautiful question. There's a debate between some of my friends who make films. Some make documentary films and narrative-based, kind of, they follow a rationale that is a logic of film. And others make films that are immersive, non-linear films. It makes me think of the relationship maybe that writing could have to filmmaking, and that is it possible to still use words? You're obviously using words, but in a way allowing allowing language to be a tool that instead of directs you toward a thing, allows you to be fully in the thing. And I think it's a different set of muscles in a way.
Yeah, I think also Mark Bradford's work, I think your work does the same thing. You're in a moment of repetition, you're in a thing, and it's not solving. It's not to solve a thing. It's to accumulate. It's to embody the impossibility of the resolution of a thing. And you feel it. You actually, because you cannot resolve it, you end up naming it as a feeling.
I just read a New Yorker article. I'm way behind it, 6 months ago. But it involved a gentleman from the Chicago area named Joshua Boyer, who was convicted in a DEA stash house sting, where the DEA had recruited poor black men to get involved with what they thought would be a raid of a drug stash house, steal the drugs, and earn thousands of dollars, when in fact the whole thing was a DEA setup. Well, this gentleman proved that it was racially motivated, and he was released on his appeal. My question, at the end of the article that I was reading, he said, I had this stone on my back. They went to visit the storage locker where all this went down. And he said, I had this stone on my back. And he's telling the reporter, and I got weak in my knees. And he says, because my body has memory. And I don't think he got the phrase from you, but it seems to be, he says, my body remembers. But I think it's a truth. And I'd just like to hear you elaborate a little bit more on the body has memory.
Well, you know, when I was at Jennifer Packer's show and I came up against that painting and I saw it said the body has memory, I didn't think she necessarily took it from me. I just thought, we're both black women, we know something communally. Because every day we have negotiated and stepped out of the way and stepped into the way. And it has not gone anywhere. I remember all of it. And sometimes it means I have no patience for what I should have patience for. Because I am immediately there again, and again, and again. So it's a phrase that I think does a lot of work in terms of all that we have to hold in order to have a life, in order to live this life. And I'm not saying that white people don't have things we all have stuff. But they don't have all the structural stuff. They have all the personal stuff, but they don't have all the structural stuff.
Question over here, yes.
Hi, thank you so much for coming tonight. My question is about different artistic mediums. As I know you've worked in poetry, essays, and then took the time tonight to show us some visual art. And I was wondering, are there stories that visual art can tell more effectively than writing or vice versa? And just what are some of your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I think each genre has its, I think I love poetry because it is the warehousing of feeling, it's feeling runs rampant through poetry. You can say things there and do things for lots of reasons. One, because it's outside the market economy. Nobody gives a shit what you do in poetry. Nobody's waiting for that. People get very particular about what you do in fiction because a lot of money rides on that, But I think I love to do theater. My latest play, Help, just closed on Sunday. And that play started as a New York Times Magazine article. And it was a real challenge to bring something off the page onto the stage. But once it got on the stage and it was in the bodies of these, we started out with, I think, 18 white men. And then after COVID, we ended up with 10 white men and 2 white women. You could see it differently. I think when it was on the page, people were able to resist the description in a way. When it was embodied by actors, it was harder to say, I have never seen that. So I think painters and their practice, I know personally that as a viewer, I am entering into a world that I can't replicate, that I'm seeing things that are living in a different way than I make as a maker. But it informs me when I go off to do something else. So I feel committed to the visual arts as a kind of pedagogy that allows then my writing to do things it wouldn't normally do.
We have time for one last question. Yes, please.
One final thank you again for coming in. It was really great hearing you speak. And as you previously talked about erasure with Black women, I also was wondering about your thoughts about the absorption of Black women into society. Because in Titus's first painting, where the woman was on the ground and the child was riding her bike, or was riding her back, one of her arms that was disappearing, the same skin tone was seen in the child around her head and her foot. And so I just kind of saw that as a child absorbing her, and I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on what was being absorbed from the Black woman? And then going beyond that painting, in society, how do you believe our world, or at least in America here, absorbs Black women, and how is that absorption manifesting for future generations?
Well, I think in many ways you're asking about generational trauma. I think that we have seen that from generation to generation, the trauma carries. And You know, people complain that black women can be not as much fun as white mothers, for example. I remember when I would drop my daughter off at school, this white woman would always say to me, "Why don't you stop and let her see the da-da-da-da?" And I'd be like, "Why don't you go to my job for me?" You know? And I will stand here and look at the da-da-da-da with you. No, this is a true story. I would not make it up. But I wish I were more fun. I wish I wasn't carrying all of this around with me. I wish I knew how to live with disavowal as my generator. But I don't. But my daughter's okay. She's doing all right. I think. I hope.
Thank you all for really amazing questions. I see some proud professors in the audience for their students. It's really, really beautiful to hear you all. And if we can all give Claudia Rankine our attention.
Thank you.